we help people achieve their potential? And how do we know we are getting a good outcome? Those are just a couple of the topics that I discussed today on the podcast with Dr. Rick Kubina. Dr. Rick Kubina is a PhD, BCBA, and he is Central Reach's Director of Research and a professor of special education at the Pennsylvania State University. I learned about Rick and his work at the OHABA conference. He talked all about data in such a very eloquent way. We know that data is very, very important, and it allows us to know, are we making important decisions? Is there a good outcome? We talk about the state of the field, how much it's grown. We get into a lot of great topics. I'm excited for you to listen to this conversation with Dr. Rick Kubina.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and Board Certified Behavior Analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the Autism Outreach Podcast. We have a wonderful guest for us today. We have Dr. Rick Kubina with us. Thank you so much, Rick, for coming on to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
And you came into my orbit. I mean, I think everybody knows who you are in the field of ABA, but I actually heard you speak in person at OHABA. I think it was February 2020, if memory serves me correct. And that conference has grown so much. And I remember I'm always really impressed by people who speak in public, because that was something that was really hard for me for a while. But now I've done some mindset work and I've gotten over it. Okay. So I'm going to the front of the room, as Dr. Pat Fryman says. But you talked about data, and as an SLP and BCBA, that's one of my favorite topics. And I know you go really deep on topics, but the topic you covered was it was nice. It was like a great topic. It was about data. I thought it was really relatable. And I'm nerdy, so I was like, this guy is making data seem really exciting and fun, and like we can all do it. So thank you for your public speaking skills, because anytime you can get up in front of a group of 500 people and feel like you're connecting with everybody in the audience, I think that is a really big skill that I think is hard for a lot of people.
Well, thank you for that. I will tell you a little secret. I've worked on it. I have been to, in the past, there are actual people that will coach you, and there are these exclusive workshops you can go to that help you become a better presenter. And I thought, you know what? You just got to keep learning through life. Yeah. And I attended some of those, and I started reading about it, and I practiced it. Oh, okay. And I really try hard to be the best presenter that I can. And I still mess up, but I think if you do more good things, people remember the good things, versus if you have a couple slip-ups, you don't remember those. You remember them.
Yes, that's good. Actually, I was in a speaking mastermind 2 years ago with Mike Pacquione. I have some business mentors. And so Mike Pacquione has coached, athletes and NFL players and, people that do TEDx talks. And it was a very intense watching TED Talks, practicing, workshopping. I was having people listen to my talks about like joint attention and autism that had millions of views on TED Talks on YouTube. And that's kind of like a mind wrap to get around that one. But it gave me a framework and made me feel comfortable. And then I really love Dr. Pat Fryman has this article that I think is like 15 tips for public speaking, and talking about going to the front of the room. And I just love being at the front of the room, kind of in my mind, but now I'm good with it. But I think once you get like a framework and you workshop it and I'm sure when you present, you have, I like to have my presenter notes. I do my slide deck a certain way. I have to have a clicker. I have to have a handheld mic. I'm like very neurotic about those things. But I think once you get a framework, then you feel more comfortable, right? Once you kind of work on it and things.
Absolutely true. And I know the article that you're talking about, I've shared that in the past with my doctoral students. And if you've listened to Pat Fryman talk before, he embodies everything that he says in there. Probably the top presenter in our field.
Oh, he is. It's amazing. Yeah. And I think just the stories he tells, and he's amazing. So tell us a little bit. I obviously know who you are. You're a big player in the ABA field, but for those of us that are not as familiar with your work, can you just tell us how you got into the field? I always love hearing people's stories on that.
Sure. Well, this dates myself, but back in the mid 80s is when I started my journey in psychology. And I was just lucky enough to run into a professor that was doing some things that at the time were intriguing to me. But little did I know that this guy that I was studying was very big in this field. Like, you just, it's luck. And it was pure luck. I followed up on that. In psychology degree is preparatory. You're not going to do much with a degree. So he's like, oh, you got to go to Ohio State. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, you got to study with this guy, John Cooper. John Cooper is one of the authors, Cooper, Heron, and Heward, of this book that we affectionately call the White Book, Cooper text, although there's two other authors.
Right.
And my life just went from there. I did my master's degree with Coop. And then I came back and I worked with, all of those authors that are on that book.
Wow.
They turned out to be my committee members. And it was just really very fortunate for me to just be in the right space, right time, just luck.
That's amazing. Actually, Dr. Heward, I presented at OHABA not last year, the year before. And we did a talk. I had two other duly certified people. We did an ethics talk about SLP BCBA collaboration, which it's like, you're like, are there 400 people in this room because they need this ethics CEU, or is it because they want to see me? But regardless, ethics always packs a room. You know what I'm saying? I actually teach the class here at Kent State. There's like an online, course. I've been teaching it for 6 years, this semester, actually. But I was getting ready and he was speaking in front of me, and then he actually stayed. He's so cool to meet at conferences, and I have his book. About the behavior contracts. I have 3 kids. Yes. Like, we have behavior contracts for all the kids. I told my husband I was going to put him on one too, but everything, they're all signed, started the school year. But he, was active student engagement, participating in my talk. And it was so cool. Like, it's just neat that you worked so closely with those people. And he's so cool at a conference because he goes to sessions, he's taking notes, he's engaged in learning. And, when I first started presenting at conferences, I really started trying to do more in-person talks about a year ago. I would just be like so nervous that I would be like just kind of like resting until it was my time to present. But now, now I'm in a groove. So now I'm meeting people and things like that, and learning, going to other sessions. Sometimes I was like, oh no, what if I go to the session? It's so great. And then I have to get up and I'm like, hello, so, but I've kind of got over that. But if you ever go to a conference, I think that's what's nice about ABA conferences is that you see the most important people. Like, I remember I met Dr. Mark Sundberg at like the hotel bar because I was with Mary Barbera, who I know is a friend of yours. She's a friend of mine. And it's just funny. They're smaller. Speech therapy conferences are just larger. But I think that's going to change because the field is really growing. So which kind of leads into my next question, which I love talking to. I've been doing some work with BDS, so Dr. Stephen Eversole, and talking to him about conferences, like when he was in the field. Like, I think he was at a conference and Skinner was there, and just, interesting things the field has changed so much just in the time that I've been certified, which is about 12 years. So what do you think, like, how have you seen the field change since you've started in the field?
Yeah, wow, that's a deep question. My very first conference was 1993. And when I went to that conference, it was in Chicago. I'll still remember it to this day. There was a talk on shaping, and Karen Fryer, who your audience members might not know, but she's like the most famous animal trainer that's out there, was with Ogden Lindsley, who's the founder of Precision Teaching. There was another very famous animal person. At any rate, and there was one other person. I'm sitting there and I'm listening to these folks. This is like the first talk I go to, and they're just talking about all these things. I look back now and I wish I would have videoed it because it was the most profound talk with the most profound people. And, they're talking about these things that they learned out of the 60s and 70s. We're that generation of my age. I was able to listen to them, to interface with them. Now, this is how it's true just through humanity. Wherever you are, wherever you find yourself in terms of age, there's going to be a time where you have that. Like, your folks might be, like, for me, those folks back then are going to be the folks now where you're going to hear, like, when Mark Sundberg and these other people
Right.
and it's always going to be like that because you just, time keeps moving forward. People are young at one point. Next thing you know, that they're old and they pass. And then, that's just the cycle of life. And I
Right.
become very reflective on that the older that I've become. And when I think about the field and how it's changed, it's very easy to fall into that, old man on the yard shaking his fists at the world, like this isn't how we did things. And that's going to always be true. And what I have found personally is to take what has worked from that time and figure out how can you plug it in, how can you make that accessible, and how can you share that with the current group. And some of the things that were done back then, a lot of people also were very idealistic, and you have this certain romanticism or nostalgia about the old times. Well, the old times weren't, you're looking at those at the positives and you're not looking at the things that weren't so negative. So there's a lot of things where the field is changing for the better, and some of the things were changing for not so good. And I suppose if you wanted specifics, I could talk about some of the specifics, but just generally speaking, my take on where the field was back then, the way the emphasis on analysis was more back then, whereas now that is not taught as much as it was back then. But now there's a huge push on compassionate care. And while there were, people would talk about that, there was nowhere near the push on that back and then. So there's a lot that has changed, and I think the field is evolving and it's getting better. And let me say this to your audience: there were very few SLPs back in the day who were interested in behavior analysis. Now there are many SLPs. And in fact, I have some very dear friends who are SLPs who are talking about evidence-based SL. There's all these things too that have just made SLPs more aligned with some of the things. Again, there's differences in how you're trained and taught, but that's okay. So lots of differences and very good changes.
Yeah. I think the idea about compassionate care. I had Dr. Cody Morris on my podcast, I think last year. He's awesome. And I just talked about his article at a recent conference about Ascent. There were other authors on that article too. And what was interesting about that article that he wrote about Ascent was he talked about how we have been talking about this in our field for quite a while. And he just brought up some like really old school articles that I used to have my ethics students read. One about like people's rights to eat too many donuts and take a nap. Like, I can't remember the exact article, but you know what I'm saying? Like, why are we holding our clients to a higher standard than like we would? Like, sometimes if I'm working home on a Friday, I'm exhausted, I might like do some emails from bed, because I can, right? Like, why are we like doing that? So yeah, I think that is interesting. I do understand like, I was talking to Matt Sikoria last week, and we're working on a project together, and he said something that I thought was really interesting. He said, when did ABA become a 4-letter word? So, as being a speech therapist and a BCBA, I've been practicing over 20 years and I've been duly certified 12. And when I first started doing both, it was like, people were just unfamiliar with ABA is what it kind of seemed. And they were like, I don't know what a MAND is. And I don't know what a TACT is. And, it was kind of like that, we're supposed to use understandable language. We're ethically called to do that. Right. But now it's so adversarial. Like when I first started my podcast, we're almost on episode 200. I had on a lot of like, we'll call them influencers in the SLP space. I was invited to speak at the biggest things in the whole SLP world, invited presentations online, virtually, in person. And then as this shift has changed with like the neurodiversity movement, which I think there's some good things coming out of that, and Gestalt language processing and all this, I just like 2 years ago, I was talking to one of my business coaches, and he was like, you just have to lean into ABA, and this has to be like your whole personality. You can't just be like, it's part of you. So really now on the podcast, I mostly have BCBAs. I'll have people from my membership that are SLPs, but are behaviorally oriented. So it's nice that you have some colleagues that are SLPs in real life that are on board with ABA, because if you ever spend any time online, which you probably are not on Instagram like I am, but it's very, very us versus them. So that is really sad, for the field.
It is. Yeah, that unfortunately is a byproduct of social media in general. It's not just in our fields. That's just society.
Yeah.
The Democrats versus the Republicans. If
Yeah.
you're here in the States, that's the, you're this religious group versus that religious group.
Yeah.
And it gets so niche. Like the more niche you are. So, and what people in the media have found, and this is true, what they found just in general, is if you can evoke outrage, that will evoke people's attention. And we live in the attention economy where if you can get attention, then great. And people will just say provocative, outrageous comments because it's going to piss somebody off, and then we'll respond. But that garners attention, it garners likes. And that's what people do. And it's unfortunate because the civility and the opportunity to have authentic conversations, oftentimes that's lost once you go into this campism.
Yeah. It's very hard for somebody that I am putting myself on although I do think LinkedIn, LinkedIn is social media. It is more professional, but I always, every time I speak at an ABA conference, I'm like, and if you're not on LinkedIn, you should be on there because that's where I've met like all these amazing BCBAs. So it is nice. So what advice would you have for professionals who are new to the field?
I would tell people to figure out, and this gets back to how you introduced me, figure out how to be the best at collecting data. And that might seem simple, but it's actually a very complex process. And when you collect data, there are ways you can do it that are not so effective and ways that are very effective. And what I mean by that, how do you measure effectiveness? It all comes down to decision making. If you're in an applied position, if everything you do is about making good decisions, outcomes occur in life, and there's things that we call luck. And when I talk about luck, all luck means is circumstances beyond our control. And if something happens that is not good, we call that bad luck. If something that happens that is good, we call that good luck. You just can't control that. What you can control is the goodness, the quality of the decisions you make. And no matter who you are, if you're in an applied role, you want to make good decisions. And those decisions are going to be manifold. You will make decisions all the time. Should you continue that program? Should you switch that program? That's a bigger decision. But when you're in the chair at the moment, or you're sitting on the floor, whatever you're doing, how well did this work with this particular student or client or wherever you find yourself? And you'll make decisions about that. And being able to make quality decisions is going to take you very far. Now, there's no system that's going to give you perfect decision making because that's not the world we live in. And as I said, luck is always going to occur. And some people confuse the luck that occurs with them being good decision makers. There's a woman named Annie Duke who used to be a poker player, and she wrote this incredible book on decision making. And she uses this term called resulting. And I love this term because resulting means that things have happened in your life, and things have been positive, and you tend to attribute that to your decisions. But if you looked at that process very closely, it wasn't your decision. It was these other outcomes that just happened. And you can fool yourself into thinking you are a really good decision maker. And if this is the outcome of this resulting, that's something that you need to pay attention to. So being able to do really good with decisions, to make good decisions, to collect data, that will be something that you can take for your entire career. And there's always things that you can be better at professionally and within your field. But if you can take and collect data really well and make good decisions, that's going to help you filter out these things that aren't good. That you go to a presentation, you listen to a very eloquent speaker, and you're like, yes, you listen to that speaker, you want to do what they're doing because they're charming. They have this really great PowerPoint, but in the end, they're sharing something that is just not that good. And there are many people like that, and people are going to come across that. You would never know that if you don't have a mechanism that's going to allow you to filter that in. What is that mechanism? It's data collection, which leads us to decision making.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. I know. I did a talk, like, I think it was last year for a group of SLPs and BCBAs, public school. And one of the questions they asked me was how often they should take data. And I was like, every single time I sit down with a client, I'm still a treating clinician 2 days a week. I take data. Like, even if I forgot like the main data sheet, or like, let's say I'm in a different part of the building, right, with a student, like, I'm still taking data, because I think it's that idea of like, we don't know where we're going if we don't know where we're at. Like, those things that are so basic is like collecting baseline, including that in the IEP present levels. I'm school-based 2 days a week. So I think some of those things, and the district I used to work in was really affluent. So, and we had a lot of non-public programs that I actually worked at as well, in there. So people would try to like move into this district to try to catapult into like a non-public program. And we would be like, no, 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 no. I'm the speech therapist over at the non-public program. Like, this is like, our district had 4 speech therapists, 2 were SLP BCBAs, and there were only 12 in our state of Ohio. So, it was really great. I remember one time my data got subpoenaed, and I was just like, I was not nervous. I was like kicking my feet up. I was like, go for it. This is a tutorial in how you take data. Do you know what I mean? This is a visual analysis. I would have people graphing like data. This is unheard of in the speech therapy world. You know what I mean? And now we know it's all, we can do these things electronically. But back in the day, we had data binders and all the things, because if we don't, it's like, well, what did you work on? Or you see a progress note, and it's like, is able to label functional vocabulary with 75% accuracy. It's like, well, what were the labels? And what are you talking about? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of growth in the data field. So I think I try to like be sugarcoated a little bit and say, like, how often are you taking data? And you should probably do it more. And then be specific about your reporting, because I think that's so important when you get a progress note and you can see exactly what a student's been working on, because otherwise you don't really. It's like, what are we doing, right, in the sessions? We don't know how to make those decisions, like you're saying, about IEP goals or progress notes or next things that we're working on. So I love that. Thanks for sharing that. The field has really grown, rapidly. And I know you've seen it too, because you've been in the field longer than me. I know when I went to the OHABA conference a really long time ago, one of the first times, it was like one room at like a college, and there were like 200 people there. And then, now I've been back, there's breakout sessions. We're getting some of the best speakers, that there are in the field. So it's really grown rapidly. What do you think we need to focus on to make sure that we're providing this high level of care to clients?
That's again, a really good question. How do you know, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but how do you know that anything works? Well, you have some outcome. What is that outcome? That outcome has to be quantified in some way. And it's not always easy to figure out what does that outcome look like. At this point in my career, I have had the good fortune to spend some time consulting with very large payers.
Mm-hmm.
And at that level, we're talking about these companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies.
Mm-hmm.
And their clients are across 30 states.
Mm-hmm.
And they struggle with the same issues that people in the field struggle with. And that is, how do you understand if you're getting a good outcome? And, from their perspective, they are the payers. They want to know, why is it that this group of professionals over here always have their hand out, and they're always saying, they want the full hours and they're not showing the progress. And again, when you actually start talking with people, like, corporations are like any large institutions. You get a bunch of people, and within that group, you meet some really good people. You meet some dedicated people, some people that very much want to support what the mission of that entity is. Now, it doesn't always work out that way. Some of these corporations will do things where, they're slashing costs, and they'll do some sketchy things. And as a result, people rightly will conclude that this organization is just about the bottom line. But when you talk with folks in there, there are some organizations are really trying hard to make sure that doesn't happen. So it gets down to this idea of outcomes, and how do you measure those outcomes? How do you share those outcomes? And as a field, how can we all come together and standardize those outcomes? And that's a big problem in ABA. It's a big problem in SLP, or in speech and language pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychology, social work. You have many people doing things, but in terms of standardizing what those outcomes are, it's just not there. So that's something that needs to happen so that the field can move forward.
Yeah, I love that. So tell us about Central Reach and the work you do as the director of research. I know about Central Reach just because every once in a while I have to put a note in there, but I don't really use it a lot. I was on the website. I was like, oh, this is a whole thing. But everybody in the field, I feel like, is using Central Reach. But can you just tell us, for people that, like, speech therapists may not know about it, right? Unless they're working in an ABA setting. I'm not sure if you guys have a presence there, but tell us a little bit about Central Reach and the work that you do as the director of research.
I have been so fortunate to be affiliated with Central Reach. Fun fact, we were the very first, and by we, my colleague and I, created a data decision-making software program. It was called Chartlytics. We were acquired by Central Reach back in 2018. We were the very first acquisition of that company. And my colleague, we've been with Central Reach ever since. And Central Reach is it's a suite of software that's geared for the autism IDD space. And there are many different software offerings that are available in there. And what I'm so excited about, and one thing where I've shifted, is I've been doing research with AI. And the company is looking at how can we embrace AI so that it's incredibly helpful and empowers the people that are using the product. Anytime you have a business is only going to succeed is if it's making money. However, that doesn't mean that there's no morality in this and there's no goodwill to this. And this is a company that has a very explicit purpose, which is to help people achieve their potential. And I love that about the company. And I love the fact that it's a business that is continually expanding and creating these different products that augment people, do not replace people. And that's what I'm doing with AI, is I'm looking at how can AI augment what therapists, behavior analysts are doing, and it's not meant to replace them. There's a lot of fear out there with AI that AI is going to take their jobs. And in some instances, that could be true. But in many other instances, especially in healthcare, I don't believe that that's going to be true. And in fact, you see where it's going in healthcare, and many people in healthcare, they're embracing AI to the fullest. And I see many analogies to what's happening in ABA. And I feel that with this research I'm doing, it's going to help allay people's fears, at the same time show them this is the promise of what AI can do. And here's one more thing I'll say about that. AI is not going away. You can put your head underneath the covers and hope that it goes away, but it's not going away. And you're going to be competing against people that are going to be using AI products, and you just won't be able to compete with them anymore. And I feel, again, I'm very fortunate to be in this position where I can contribute and help move us down this path where, again, AI is augmenting us, not replacing us.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll be interested to see what you're working on. I just know from, like, a small business owner's perspective, I went to a conference. It was here in Cleveland for content creators. And there was a lot of presentations on AI, and some of them I'm already using. Like, I definitely am on ChatGPT and all the things, but I use this other thing for my podcast called Opus, and it's AI. And so after my podcast manager posts our stuff on YouTube, then my assistant takes that link, puts it into this AI generator, and then it breaks it into 10 little clips. Now, one or two are going to be good, but I mean, that saves me so much time.
Right.
And it has captions, and it's like exactly correctly what I'd want to share. And it's just unbelievable. Like, and I think you're right. It's like obviously AI is here. We need to feel comfortable using it. And the people that are really going to excel are the people that understand the power of AI and how they can use it to move the needle in whatever they're doing, because it's applicable for so many different things, So, interesting. Okay. I love that. I'm excited about that. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It was just amazing to speak to you. And this was very fun. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I would say the best place to follow me is on LinkedIn. I have an Instagram account, but I'm very weak in terms of my presentation. I also, I do some things with Facebook, but honestly, I have like 200 people that request to be my friend. I just am not on that hardly at all. I don't even pay attention to it anymore. So. Right. And it's kind of sad because I'm like so involved in these other things, and even with some of these social media things, they are what you make of them. And hit me up on LinkedIn. I would love to support any of your listeners that have further questions. That's probably the best place to link with me professionally.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It was great to connect.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.